Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 Podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. We give you 3 short stories, 1 big story every week. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta, and we had an interview today with someone we really admire.
Absolutely, yes.
And I was trying to be fancy today. I was super excited. I walked into the studio this morning, and I was like, I am going to use an Ann Zeta word on Ann Zeta. And I was like, I just got a cardenza.
And I said, you mean a credenza?
I was so proud. I was like, I would have called it an entertainment setup, but I didn't know it had a fancy word until I bought it. So, but
now you own a credenza.
Now I own a credenza or a cardenza, whatever. Yes. But we have a lot to update you guys. Before we get into the 3 short stories, and we have a great interview today, I do want you guys to know crystal clear that Tuesday is the day to show up and speak out against vouchers. If you've been following the battle over school vouchers in Texas, Tuesday, March 11th is your chance to make your voice heard. The Public Education Committee, chaired by Brad Buckley, will hold a hearing on HB 3 to establish a school voucher program. Public testimony will be allowed. Testimony is limited to 2 minutes per person. This isn't just a formality. This is your opportunity to tell lawmakers directly why diverting public school funds to private institutions is terrible. And given that Buckley has already been booed twice this month for pushing vouchers, it's clear Texas isn't on board. Here's what you need to know. When Tuesday, March 11th, 8 a.m., where JHR 140, Texas State Capitol, testimony limited to 2 minutes per witness. Thank you, Michelle Davis, for all the work you do at Lone Star Left to keep us informed. Now, let's go ahead and move into our 3 short stories.
So our first short story was sparked off by some articles in the news about measles in our community. And the highlighted story is a Star-Telegram story entitled, Tarrant County is preparing for measles, moderate to high likelihood of a case here. So I think we did touch on this prior. We talked about how there's been measles outbreaks. We talked about how there's a local school here that has the lowest vaccination rate. But today this kind of all came together for us because we did finally hear from our Tarrant County medical director, Brian Byrd, who I had seen one earlier reference to, and I was wondering where the county was in all of this. And I saw an early reference indicating that they would not be speaking about it until they had made a presentation to the county commissioner's court, which gave me a little bit of pause because if there is a health situation that is imminent and dangerous, I think that our medical professionals should be able to speak out immediately and not wait for direction from elected officials.
So a kicker of why this is the top story here is because, measles is becoming a conversation across the country, but also West Texas is dealing with the measles outbreak. Even lives are being taken by measles itself. Now, here's what makes this story even more appealing is last week, I think it was my loss where I talked about Mercy Culture and their low vaccination rates. What to know there is that I talked about how only 14% of kindergartners at Mercy Culture Preparatory Academy were vaccinated for the 2023-2024 school year, according to data from the State Health Department. Mercy Culture is the religious organization that talks about Democrats are the devil. They bullied our city council to allow their exploitation center for sex trafficking victims. But they also have a state rep named Nate Scatsline, who's a rep whose kids go to Mercy Culture Preparatory Academy, and he awards the school the Medical Freedom Award, awarding them for having low vaccinations.
Hey guys, quick video. I just walked into an MC Prep board meeting and there was these balloons and a surprise gift. I'm like, what's this going out? And I just found out, I'm a little behind on the news. I'm a little slow, getting old. But I just found out we are the #1 school in Texas for least vaccinations. And I guess the news got a hold of it, and they were trying to spin it like it was some awful thing. But I just want to congratulate all of the family members of MC Prep that embrace freedom of health, and they're not allowing government or science projects to affect how you live and lead your life. I know the entire world was shut down with insanity, and people were fired from their job for forced vaccinations. And freedom is something that we take seriously. Religious freedom, freedom of our health. And so shout out to MC Prep for being the least vaccinated school in Texas. We'll take it, or as Mercy Culture say, we celebrate it, we'll put it on the board.
But he shared two. One, acknowledging the Medical Freedom Award for them, but the second one was a distasteful call out to Bud Kennedy, a Star Telegram reporter, tweeted about this number on his X account, and basically Nate Scatzline goes and tries to dehumanize or decredits Star Telegram, starts to decredits Bud Kennedy, and it was really distasteful. And so there's this has now grown to be a topic around Tarrant County. And I think what Ann is saying to me that's most importantly is that Dr. Brian Byrd, who's our county commissioner, health commissioner, does not have the right to be quiet anymore, and needs to stand up if he's truly about doing what's right for Tarrant County. And I think this is beyond just Brian Byrd needing to stand up. This is something that we should be standing up, even our city council. Each of you should have a letter wanting to advocate for your community to make sure they're protecting themselves from measles, and that there is not, science projects, but real vaccines that can improve our community. Because the problem with stuff like measles is that when you decide not to do something, you can still harm other public people by walking into a grocery store with the same people who you choose, even when you choose not to get vaccinated. This is a classic we over me situation, and Nathan Scatzline and his people has turned this into an individualistic action. No, but there's repercussions to everyone else when you decide to be more open to measles, which is a highly contagious disease. And even there's news out there talking about how Mercy Culture Preparatory Academy, you're talking 30, 80 kids can get highly impacted going to the hospital, and possibly one having real issues that could even lead to death by simply being playful about this mantra. There was so much distastefulness in what he did. And
I mean, he made some snidey comment about maybe you probably don't know who Bud Kennedy is. And to your point about being snarky about Bud Kennedy's comments. The other thing is, like, recently I listened to a podcast that talked about when you were born, when people got measles because of exposure and got immunities due to exposure, when the vaccine came into play, and when a double dose of the vaccine came into play, and found out that I was in a category that they were recommending get a booster because I was born after 1958. I was vaccinated probably before 1968 because I was born in 66. And therefore, I probably only got one vaccine. So I checked with my doctor, found out, yes, it does no harm to get another booster now, and that probably would make sure that my coverage was full. And so I have an appointment on Wednesday at Walgreens to go get that booster.
If you watch the news article where Brian Byrd is on the news and the reporter asks him, well, what's your take on State Rep Scatzline saying these comments and about Mercy Culture, and he clearly just dodges it without having any courage.
Dr. Byrd says Tarrant County has a 90 to 97% overall measles vaccination rate.
And they're not allowing government or science projects to affect how you live.
Even as the pastor of Fort Worth's Mercy Culture Church has gone on social media celebrating that a school associated with the church has one of the lowest measles vaccination rates in the state. The church has declined comment, so we asked Dr. Byrd about his level of concern.
We're going to focus on treating the people who need us, and we'll leave it at that.
Now, to me, the last time I remember Brian Byrd having any action around anything health-oriented was banning cell phones, and he did an opinion piece in the Star Telegram talking about the data on cell phones. He took a proactive step because he read a book and he then did something about it. And here you go, having data and evidence, and you're pitting your tails between your legs. And this is where I think that is the issue here with our health professional, is that he's not standing up to the people who are choosing to villainize science.
Yeah, I think in the article, they mainly concentrate on what to do after the fact. So, like, these are the symptoms of measles. And if you get exposed to measles, then this is what you should do. But there's not a whole lot of emphasis coming from the county on proactive measures. And, you know, this is not just measles. There's the Fort Worth Rotary Club has a policy of donating to the polio foundation, or to eradicate polio in our community. And polio was pretty much eradicated until folks started not getting vaccinated as much as they have in the past. And now there's a threat of polio coming back. So, you know, I think that this is just that situation of elected officials without medical training, non-subject matter experts telling people what to do, and being louder about what they think you should do than people who have medical training and expertise.
And that's why it's like, one, like, Nate Scatzline is like an awful human being, in my opinion. Like, one, you attack Bud Kennedy, which is like the most respectable Fort Worthian that we probably ever, like, he's in the top echelon of someone who does their job, loves their job, masters their job. If you were a fraction of a state politician, as Bud Kennedy was as a local journalist, you would is a local journalist, you would be one of the most productive state politicians in Texas. If you were a fraction as good at your job as he is at his. And then you can tell by his videos are subjective, taking disgross pictures of Bud Kennedy and other health professionals, saying that Star Telegram is losing thousands of subscribers when they're actually, due to Killer ISD news, gaining subscribers. So it's like he spits out lies, and then he says all these things. And you talk about Bud Kennedy he has 10,000 more Twitter followers than you. How's he nobody? Bud Kennedy will continue to do the work, continue to take state data from your conservative state that says your school's the least vaccinated. He didn't make the data. Star Telegram didn't make the data. And that is what all he tweeted was that. An objective table that says the lowest vaccinated is mercy culture. And instead of you having any self-awareness, you're trying to take it and make it a media thing. Well, we're going to move into a more enjoyable topic that our lovely co-host has been a part of. And we're going to talk about the updates on rail.
Yes. So I have spoken multiple times about the fact that I was tasked with joining a committee on urban rail in Fort Worth by our mayor. And recently, the conclusion of the meetings that we had as a committee were presented to the Fort Worth City Council at a work session, and I attended that work session as well. And there are two articles, one in the Fort Worth Report and one in the Star Telegram, talking about how Fort Worth proposes urban rail system emanating from downtown is the Fort Worth Report story, and does Fort Worth need an urban rail line? Here's what a study found from the Star Telegram. And I think that some folks were expecting this committee to kind of come out with a fully baked plan for urban rail. And so I got a couple of calls from folks that were like, wait a minute, is this a study to tell us that we need to continue to study? Which seems very Fort Worth, for one thing. we have a lot of studies that sometimes don't come to fruition. And all of this also causes a little bit of trauma for those of us who have been in the space around multimodal transit and, other options for people besides cars that I harp on endlessly here on this pod, because of the fact that many years ago, and I have a picture of my youngest child, who's 23 now, on the streetcar that was brought to Fort Worth as an illustration of what could be if we had moved forward with some federal dollars that we had back in 2010, 2012 era. we were studying rail, we were studying streetcars, we had a federal grant, and the city council at that time, let me be clear, I was not on the city council at that time, voted to not move forward with that. But as we continue to point out how we are growing and how widening roads and adding lanes is never going to ease congestion, many more people are coming around to the reality that other forms of transit are required in order to continue to have a good quality of life here in Fort Worth. So this committee, while we didn't come out with a fully baked study of where these lines would be exactly, we identified corridors, or exactly what type of vehicle, what type of train would be on these rails. That's part of the study as well for subject matter experts to do the next steps. What I think this committee is still important to have come together to do is that we were a broad range of people from a variety of subject matter expert areas, representing a broad spectrum of people in the community. And when I was first asked to serve, I very much wanted to know what our role was going to be and what we were there to do. And I was told that this was going to be a committee with a broad range of perspectives and opinions. And so I took that to be like I was going to have to convince people that urban rail was a good thing that we needed to figure out a path to move forward with. And I was pleasantly surprised that in the very early meetings, pretty much everyone was on board that we need to find a way to move this forward. And so there wasn't a lot of convincing, but then there was also a little bit of, well, what are we continuing to meet for? If our only question is this something that needs to happen? We all say yes. Let's just go ahead and tell the council yes. Yep. But this is a tough thing to deliver, and it's not an inexpensive thing to deliver. I always point out to people the expense of road building, because I think people just take that as a given, and the expense of owning a car and all of those things that people just chalk up and don't even think about, but they use it as a bludgeoning tool to smack down any proposals for other types of transit. So that I need to say. But having a broad range of folks throughout the community that come from a variety of viewpoints saying that this is necessary is a step in the process that is necessary in order to give the folks that are going to make the policy decisions, that are going to pursue the funding, backing and support for this to move forward. And it is very much in my wheelhouse of trying to find ways to give people the things they need to be in favor of and supportive of, versus constantly just being on, the adrenaline of hearing about the things that you don't want to happen and showing up to say no to things. This is very much one of the things that I hope will help people say yes to things. And not all of these people that were on the committee are transit experts. So it was necessary to have additional meetings where we could hear from the experts what this type of a system requires. And so that is what we did with the additional meetings that we had. We were presented with the studies that were done in the past. We were presented with data and information and material from successful rail systems in other communities, some of them similar to ours, and wins and losses of lessons learned that those folks, learned so that we don't have to make the same mistakes if there were things that they should have done differently. And so that's all encompassed in the report that was presented to council. As this article, it goes back and does all of the things of talking about how we had a similar proposal in 2010, but it failed to garner support. So again, back to that point of their needing support for these things. I think that was very much accomplished. I think we are in challenging times now at the federal level, the state level, and the local level to get these things done. We are still fighting battles here where folks are proposing to reduce funding for our public transportation authorities. DART is in that situation. Dallas Area Rapid Transit is in that situation right now. So I'll have EJ put into the notes some advocacy in that arena where you can let your legislators know that if anything, we should be increasing funding for public transportation at this moment, not decreasing it. But there's some folks out there that are very much intent on decreasing. So,
you know, what I've learned and noticed is that there's people who really crave and love when we talk about this piece on the pod. Like, that's some of my greatest feedback is they like to hear about the updates on urban planning, transportation. And so the fact that I think everyone gets their pieces of the pie when they listen to the 817 podcast. And what's funny is every time I'm around city people and people, when I go to events and they're like, oh, I listen to the podcast. The number one thing is they say, it's like, oh, I really love that you have Ann on. I'm like, yeah, isn't she great? She's like, yeah, she really like, they're like, yeah, she really gives it credibility. I'm like, wow, awesome.
oh, no.
Oh, I appreciate you guys for, you know, I'm like, oh, so EJ's comments aren't credible, but I'm jokingly, I know that's not what they mean, but they're like, oh, she gives a lot of credibility to the podcast because they respect that you have been in the dirt with them and know how their positioning works. So I think a lot of city people listen because they also know that you understand their voice.
Yeah.
So even though they're, you know,
Dissing you?
yeah, you know, it's all good. I understand, guys. Let's go ahead and, speaking of credibility, let's go ahead and move into short story number 3. So short story number 3 is actually, I think, really kind of is about credibility. And when does credibility get harmed so much that you should end up not being the leader of a movement anymore? And so why I say that is because Tarrant County Sheriff's son arrested in Arlington accusing of soliciting a minor. The adopted son of Tarrant County Sheriff Wayborn is facing 3 charges, including 2 felonies, after he was arrested Monday evening, according to court records. William Wayborn, who's 20 years old, was charged with soliciting of prostitution of a minor, assault on a peace officer, and resisting arrest, court records show. He was transferred to the Arlington jail and later bonded out. So, at the end of the day, Wayborn, interestingly, and again, I think that the tough thing for us about even bringing this up, we felt like we had to bring it up because we're always talking about the jail and we're always talking about how Wayborn shouldn't be our sheriff anymore. And so, but once you start bringing in family, I do think it's hard. But Sheriff Wayborn's dynamic and his family dynamic is he has 8 adopted children. And, you know, he even has Sergey Wayborn, who is 29, who has been in and out of Tarrant County Jail since 2017. Now, that is an admirable thing to do, to adopt. So, like, I think that's powerful. But I don't want this to be about Sheriff has 10 children, so 8 of them are adopted. I don't want this to be about, you know, his responsibility as a father, or is this bad? To me, it's more about, like, when is public faith, like, when do you step down, right? Like, when do you realize that this is too close to your responsibilities, right? This is your own kid who knows who you are, who knows what county you lead, and decides to get in trouble in that county. And, you know, I think that ultimately is, it got me and Ann to talk about the conversation of when do we start having bad faith in our leaders to be leading in positions when they already have a bunch of other data stacked to them, and then you add on something like family getting involved into the messiness of your role.
Yeah, I think we had some back and forth about whether to touch on this in this way. And I think I come at things slightly differently as someone who has children. And we had a little discussion before we started recording about, like, are we responsible for the actions of our adult children based on, like, how we raise them? You know, and to your point about children doing things in the community in which you're serving around the arena of subject matter that you have inserted yourself as an expert. So our sheriff has very much led the charge with human trafficking and all of this kind of stuff. And so he has put himself in the center of saying that he's working on these things. And then, you know, some of the discussion that I've seen has been talking about how quickly he was able to bond out of jail. And so that opened up the whole conversation about what has happened in our jail to people who haven't had the ability to get out as quickly. And so it is fraught, is the word that I used when we first started discussing whether or not we were going to talk about it. And I'm still feeling a little hesitant and worried about the fraughtness of it all. But to one of the points that we came up with, in the past, there have been times when people in leadership roles in elected offices or, leading companies or whatever, if something came up that was this public and, disturbing and upsetting, that people would voluntarily resign from a role or announce that they need to put more effort into, dealing with something that's come up in their personal life. But that doesn't seem to happen as much anymore. For the most part, people can even be involved in things their own selves and still continue in roles of leadership and expertise that they in their personal life have done something that might signal that they might not be the most responsible person to be carrying that mantle.
Yeah, and I kind of use an example of let's say I was like, what if I think Kay Granger and the water district situation is a great example of Kay Granger didn't necessarily do anything wrong there besides maybe giving her nepotism to her kids, but then her kids started hiring other people, and now Mark Vesey is in charge of this Panther Island project. Now, I'm not saying that was a direct because Kay Granger felt like she needed to remove herself from the situation, but to me, there used to be this respect of leadership where you would have enough self-awareness to realize this action, if this action happened to a leader I was following, I would step down and remove myself. And it's just we're just at a position in society where people can just do whatever they want and never feel like their code of ethics makes them need to ever step down. And I wish to me, I don't know why you would continue to want this role if you're having, issues already with, just internally, but then also the external pressures of this has to be a horrific and tough job. You don't have the trust of the public, and I just don't know why you would continue down this step without feeling needing to make a transition.
I mean, I think you and I are surrounded by people that are looking at this from the perspective of a lack of trust for the job that's being done. But I think that there's probably people in the community who continue to signal that they do think he's doing an okay job or a good job. And if you choose to only look at that segment of the population, which, opens up that whole conversation of if you are elected in a role and half of the county is of a different mind, do you just focus on the people who are of the same mind as you and ignore the people who are of a different mind? I don't think so, but I think that's where we are now with a lot of our elected officials.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Wayborn's kids are still better than Trump's kids, and look how much success they get. So it's not like we don't care about this as an American's majority. We allow to propagate. But let's be clear, I think that's a white man privilege you get to do. You have to be flawless as a black or brown person. You'll get in trouble for allegedly not living in your district. So it's just the error is just so massively higher. We're talking about a guy who's also forget his kids, over 70 deaths in the Tarrant County Jail since his leadership. You're talking about a guy who gets on panels for voter integrity and saying that our voter boxes and how we vote in Tarrant is mightily could be accepted to rigging. You're talking about a guy who allows people and funders to come go skeet shooting with him for money and go shoot guns with Bill Wayborn. You're talking about a guy who comes and hangs out multiple times with Kyle Rittenhouse, a kid who was under the age but went and would use his own arms to be his own human policing in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and kill someone because he thought he was the police. The list goes on how much we allow these guys to just do whatever they want. And obviously it feels like, in a way, some of their kids feel the same, that they could do that too. And so it's just, to me, that's the unfairness. You're right. Of a society where majority of people accept our Donald Trump is our leader, and our sheriff can do this. So, but we should still talk about it, as obviously those privileges aren't to everyone. And so now we're going to move into the big story. The big story is with Brandi Waller Pace. She is a musician, an educator, a scholar, an activist, and she's also the founder of Decolonizing the Music Room. She's also the founder and organizer of Fort Worth African American Roots Festival, FWAAM Fest. And we're going to talk about FWAAM Fest, which is March 15th, an incredible event that we highly recommend you to show up to. It's one of those rare experiences that are not like anything else here in Fort Worth. And truly, I say it when I went last year, Fort Worth doesn't really deserve Brandi and deserve the experiences she curates for us. And so we really have a privilege to sit down with such an amazing mind and such an amazing talent, who is actually someone who's a great example to talk about the challenges that we just talked about in some of our short stories that others don't have the privilege to have. And so here is Brandi Waller Pace.
So I was in school in Washington, D.C. I went to Howard University for undergrad and grad school, HU. And I met my then husband there. And after graduation, going into grad school, it got to a point where it was like D.C. is probably not going to be the long-term place. So we moved down to Fort Worth, where all of his family is from, and didn't really know anything about the area. But I majored in jazz in school, so I just Googled Fort Worth jazz. And Arts Fifth Avenue, the longstanding nonprofit, came up. So I sent an email to who I now know is Gracie Toon, and was just like, I majored in jazz. I'd like to make music down here. I'd love to connect with you. And she ended up bringing me in to teach at the summer playhouses, teach jazz choir to the kiddos. And that was really my first introduction to the music scene in Fort Worth. And not terribly long after, I began teaching public school music, general music, in Lake Worth ISD, then Fort Worth ISD. And those two things, I think, are really responsible for me cementing my place here and building my network in Fort Worth.
You said cementing your spot here in Fort Worth. Why have those things been crucial to doing that for you?
Yeah. First of all, just finding music community. I'm a music maker. I'm a music educator. And I was fresh out of school, so Fort Worth was really the place where I got my footing as an adult, and it helped me to build not only professional community, but personal community. I still, to this day, see fellow Fort Worth ISD coworkers, see some of my students who I cannot believe are as big as they are.
Yeah, adults.
Yeah.
Hanging out with a teacher friend, I see that too, where we run into people, it's like, she's a rock star. Grown students are fun.
Yeah. And even, my kids being in Fort Worth ISD and connecting with other parents, like-minded parents, it's just really where I feel like I built my life as a grown-up, I guess.
Yeah. Where was home before Fort Worth?
I'm from Atlanta originally, and grew up there, and then going off to D.C. for school was my first out of the house experience. But yeah, it was lovely being up there, but coming down here is I am really adulting now.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you say when you go back to Atlanta or to DC? How do you describe Fort Worth? What is it missing? What does it has? Is there any magic that sparkles in your eye, or is there any opportunity that fires your soul?
So I guess I'll say anywhere I go, the first thing is that Fort Worth is not Dallas. It's not a suburb of Dallas. It's the 12th largest city in the nation. I have to I feel like I've gotten to a point now where I represent I'm from Fort Worth. I'm just just so y'all know, we're our own city.
Fort Worth.
And I end up talking about the character. I hadn't realized until I moved down here that there was such an established visual art scene. We do have, the cowboy hats and boots and stuff. So I tell people, it's not exactly a stereotype. And yes, we do see people riding horses down the street, depending on the part of town you're in.
But you'd be surprised sometimes at the part of town, because I've seen it all over the place.
Yeah, I have to drive through Stop 6 for all kinds of stuff. And that's where a particular group will ride. So that's really cool. And I tell people it feels like a very big, small town because people are so interconnected. And really a good mixture of some bigger city things that someone might look for without it feeling like the level of like metropolitan overwhelm that might keep folks from wanting to move into the city.
So when you say you were with Fort Worth ISD, and I know you started a nonprofit, Decolonizing the Music Room, did that start while you were still teaching, or was that after you left teaching?
Yeah.
I mean, you continue to teach. You haven't left teaching, obviously.
There was a bit of overlap. So at the tail end of teaching, I had been doing more research into music curriculum, background of songs. I've always wanted to dig deeper into the stuff they were using in the classroom, which can be kind of hard as a music generalist because you're inundated with so much stuff. I had also started playing the banjo and started playing old time music, and that gave me a different historical frame for the music I was making, and realizing there was a great amount of overlap between a lot of early old time music and what we would have in curricula in the music classroom. So there was kind of like a critical point, I guess. And I had a colleague who one had asked if I had all the stuff I was looking up on a website. Another was like, I think it's time for you to put something up. So Decolonizing the Music Room actually started as a website, and I believe 4 or 5 other music educators created content for the site, got it ready and launched it in June of 2019. And I had a Facebook group that was kind of centered around what Decolonizing the Music Room does, but there wasn't anything like established. So I changed the name to Decolonizing the Music Room, and it got active, word got out, and by the fall, we started getting asked to do presentations. And my primary colleague, her name is Dr. Laura Baptiste-Long. We talked to each other and were like, we're doing such and such roles in this work, and what model is this? Is it a for-profit? Is it a consulting something? Is it a nonprofit? A nonprofit fit the best. So we started to go through that process, and it was January of 2020 that we became official, just ahead of the shutdown. And even though it was hard to navigate that, I think it was really a boon for our work because there were so many people interested in it. Of course, we had like that last iteration of the Black Lives Matter movement, and so people were looking for more knowledge and information. And so I think that first shutdown year, I feel like 30, 40 virtual presentations. And so we built up our reputation, but the step beyond that I'm still working on now is getting Fort Worth specifically to know that we are here versus just, kind of in the ether, in the internet.
Yeah, I think there's a number of nonprofits that kind of grew during the pandemic, but grew, like you just pointed out, more broadly, maybe in other places. And Fort Worth hasn't caught on as well.
Right.
And it's really important that the local folks support the efforts of what you're doing here in Fort Worth. So you continue to do education through that, and in person too, and online? Or?
Yeah. So I have to do my elevator pitch first. Decolonizing the Music Room's mission is centering Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian folks in music ed, music performance, music research. So we really work across music disciplines into broader fine arts and ethnic studies and such. So a major part of what we do is professional development for educators, music makers, students. That is where my teaching hat has shifted more, working with adults. I say I teach the grown-ups how to act right so they can teach the kids well. And that is really like the main direct teaching aspect. So I still will, fly out to conferences or gatherings, or sometimes go up to universities and colleges and talk to people.
And do you do some of that work here in Fort Worth, or like you said, mainly that's taking you other places?
It's mostly taking me other places. I think part of my my calling here is to really, I guess, like expand the minds of Fort Worth in a general sense. I feel like there's a lot of like steep tradition that folks are accustomed to, and there are certain areas where shaking things up is totally accepted, and other areas where they are not. In my experience with education, ethnic studies, all of that, Fort Worth is just ready to have a deeper awareness of not only this stuff, but like why it is actually relevant to everyone and relevant to our students. And you know, a bigger systemic issue is the teaching force is in like the low 80% white, whereas in Fort Worth, we know our demographics, students don't match that at all. And so getting people to understand that this stuff isn't other, it's not like supplementary stuff. This is really like the core of how we should be properly educating students, the way that we're thinking of what we're building, what we're looking at, how our plans are, how we interact with one another. That is my very, very hefty calling here. So I don't continue to be called more elsewhere than I am in my city.
Yeah, and that's amazing because I think one of the things that you are doing to push the minds of Fort Worth is the Fort Worth African American Roots Music Festival. Can you talk about that, which is coming up March 15th? Can you talk about it? What inspired it? And yeah, it definitely is. I feel like it's an action point of what you just said.
Yeah. So the Fort Worth African American Roots Music Festival, we call it FWAAM Fest. It's so funny. I put that acronym, and you know, you make a buzzword for something, and people sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. So I'm trying to make sure people are used to that. It focuses on Black history, Black culture, Black voices in American roots music. So that's like old time, jug band, early blues, early jazz, bluegrass, going into folk. And, you know, as I mentioned before, the banjo is one of the instruments I play. And when I picked it up, I was connected with someone who gave me a banjo lesson and then was like, you know, we have a string band. And for those who don't know, string band is typically fiddle, banjo, guitar, maybe bass, but usually those three. It's like our guitarist who sings is leaving to do other stuff. Would you like to join us? And so I used to joke with him, like I just went straight into guitar with my one banjo lesson and started gigging, learning a lot of the repertoire, a lot of the conventions of how you play the music. And really, I think it's kind of like lucky chance I ended up connecting with Black folks who are making this music too. It's kind of a growing network of us across the country, across North America, some beyond. And one of the earliest connections I had was a gathering in Nasons, Virginia, western part of Virginia, called the Afro-Action On-Time Music Gathering, called The Thing. And it was created and run by Dr. Dina Jennings and served as a gathering point for people who were acknowledging that Black folks are not, interlopers in this music. She is of Black Kentucky Appalachian heritage, and frankly was like tired of having white folks tell her about her own culture as if she was an outsider to it. So that was really the beginning of talking about better representation and just having a good model for gatherings. And then looking back historically, one of the landmark gatherings in what we kind of describe as like the Black banjo renaissance, I guess, is the Black Banjo Gathering that happened, I believe 2002. Don't quote me on that. And it grew out of the work of Tony Thomas and his listserv, Black Banjo. I'll have to look up the exact name of it, but it was a Black banjo focused listserv. And then Dr. C.C. Conway developed the event at one of the universities in North Carolina. And that is actually where Rhiannon Giddens, Dom Flemons, and Justin Robinson, who were the founding members of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, probably the most prominent Black string band in modern history, Grammy Award winning, met. And it was really important event in terms of connecting folks, really acknowledging the history, and the research went on from there. So, we're looking 20 years later, and we're all being influenced by it. And I believe summer of 2019, I went to Augusta Heritage Center up at Davis and Elkins College in West Virginia, and did old time music, early blues, stuff like that. And we had one, I guess, kind of like a conversation, not really like a panel, but a discussion on diversifying these spaces. And we got to the point where it was, we were talking about diversifying existing spaces versus creating our own, and how there is a need for both. And, I'm like, Fort Worth can have something. I can do something in Fort Worth, and selfishly, I don't have to fly. Everyone comes to us. So that was like the idea of the festival taking root. And it was originally supposed to happen the following fall. Yeah. Wow, it was going to be that soon. What was I thinking?
You're like, I can pull this off.
Right. So shutdown happened, and I had been tapped to curate an online event with the Bluegrass Situation, Pinecone Traditional Music. And not only did that give me a little bit of experience helping to curate, but I had to send out contracts. I had to talk to artists about their video requirements and gathering all that stuff. So when it was time to have to transition to virtual, I was like, oh, I've done this enough that I have an idea of what we're doing. And partnered with Southside Preservation Hall and Shiny Box Pictures, and we put together what ended up being a pretty sleek visual project. And what was so helpful about it is not only, did we get to create the event, but like we have something that people can reference. We have, our B-roll footage and our clips and stuff from our in-person years, but someone can look all the way back to the beginning and go, this is exactly what we're doing, while we're doing it, all of our, just everything stated up front, and then see all these wonderful artists.
Start to finish.
Yeah.
Cool.
So can you talk about how does it work today, the festival, like your festival, and the now that you are able to curate a physical in-person experience?
Yeah, so we maintain the partnership with Southside Preservation Hall, happily contracted until I think 2029 at this point. So they've been invaluable as far as like the space, helping me think of things I wouldn't have thought of, as an organizer. And then just like the sheer amount of volunteer work that the staff and board will do to help us get everything on board. I have a ton of help from Haley Green, who's our production coordinator, started on with us last year, and just a badass. Like, she just knows all the stuff. So she knows the questions to ask, things I would not think of. And then Lillian Werbin, who I met at the beginning of kind of my old time journey, wasn't here last year, but was festival assistant before and will be back this year. Again, has immense experience running events and very specific to music events, is co-owner and CEO of Elderly Instruments, probably like the best known folk instrument store in the country, and also runs events like the Banjo Gathering and all these learning / performance things that are similar to what FWAAM Fest is doing. And as far as the annual process, my brain is everywhere right now. So it happens next week, but I started booking for 2026 at the end of last year. So there's always that level of overlap. Funding overlap as well, looking at grants now for next year and looking at potential donors now for next year, while at the same time finalizing the lineup, getting the branding together, looking at the events that I am anchoring the information around. So annually, I go to the International Bluegrass Music Association conference, went to Americana Fest last fall. There's always some form of panel where I get to talk about the work. And from then on, it feels like just snowballing of like contracts, negotiating stuff, getting the media and content together. And so FWAAM Fest is a program of decolonizing the music room, of which I am the only full-time staff. So it's a lot of hats. It's a lot of hats. But once we get to this part, like we're a week out, I've had, like Haley has supported gathering volunteers, and I've had other people who have volunteered time and efforts to help with tasks that I just simply cannot do on my own. And this week is going to be like it always is in person, as we have our production meetings. I'm making sure that artists have, their rights from the airport, where they're staying, get our last minute, food and green room stuff together. And I'm still, finalizing, getting our posters and banners and such up. And then I just leave my body. And then on the other side, it's over and I'm in the bed.
Yeah. And if there's listeners listening and they haven't been to FWAAM Fest, like what is what's some rules or tips or expectations? Because it's all day, right? It's running
from
all
noon to 10 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah. So love the outline there.
It's definitely come and go, but I think what people appreciate that they don't quite realize before they get there is that there's lots of great music making, but there's learning too. There's interactive stuff. Like this year, we'll have a Rhythm Bones workshop with a couple of amazing artists who will, they'll teach, and then you get to take your bones home, and they are a bit more progressive in how they forward those traditions. So you'll hear things that don't sound like, early American music, but you'll be able to hear the through lines. We'll have a session on Black cowboy cultural and musical traditions. We'll have a podcast. Reese Palmer has Color Me Country Radio, and she is like a groundbreaking Black female country artist, and highlights other Black and brown country, folk, Americana, old-time artists. So we'll have that filming live or recording live. And you get to see and hear from these artists and scholars, but they're also just like walking around. So something you don't get at many festivals is just, you can just walk up and talk to them, have a little conversation. So it feels, kind of like Fort Worth feels like, big little town, cozy, everyone's connected, like people are there. There's not the level of separation from audience to stage that you would have in something bigger. And it feels, one of the artists said it feels like a family reunion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I agree. And people will get to see just so much stuff. It's not just that Fort Worth doesn't have something like this here, or, this stuff being taught or presented here. It's like nationwide, these narratives are like, we're trying to get them out. It's not something that everyone is hearing, in most of the country. So,
yeah, and that's I had the privilege of going last year, and I remember me and my wife like, oh yeah, let's hurry up and run over to this thing and like check this out real quick before we and we went, and then like, obviously Katrina was there from Carpenter's Cafe, and then it was, we ate, and then like after a while it's like people were jamming, and they're like, oh, let's go to the room to learn about different artists, and I'm going to miss the artist's name, but I know I have their record vinyl of theirs now because of going there, and then listening to the podcast, and then 4-6 hours later we were like there, and it was just like, because I wish I was musically inclined, but someone who enjoys listening to music, man, it was just the hall, the chords in there, just hearing the different types of music, learning about the different types of music. I said to my wife, I literally said this. I was like, Fort Worth doesn't deserve this. Like, that's what I said. And so, because like I've known of you for a long time, but never really get to sit down with you. But every time I hear you talk, I'm like, you're really trying to say a lot to us. But it's hard to say it in layman's terms, because I feel like you're so a savant or an intellectual of the thing. And really, it's truly at its core is teaching us about history of music in a way that just feels more identified to a lot of, I feel like, kids who are black or brown, you didn't get and you missed. And I felt like that was a part of my experience. Like, holy smokes, like maybe I would have been more into music if I had this experience when I was younger.
That is exactly, yep, that's it. I feel very seen. Thank you. I'm definitely trying to create, it's like we're kind of all reparenting ourselves, right? And it's like I want to create what so many of us needed, that so many kids will appreciate and not really have to question. Like I think about my kids are 12, 15, 17. And like they're so used to like black folks fiddling and playing banjo, they're just like bored. Like it's not weird to them.
Yeah.
That is their introduction. And my students in Fort Worth ISD, like that was their introduction, was like me playing the banjo for them. So yeah.
One of the things that drew me to you when you first started talking about this was trying to support the arts in Fort Worth, because as EJ just said, he doesn't feel like musically inclined. I don't feel musically inclined, although I was in choir as a child, but I don't feel musically or artistically inclined, but I believe so deeply that the arts are so important in our community. So, speak to what you think the gaps are, where people can plug in. We rely a lot on nonprofits to carry the load in Fort Worth, and I think they can do that well with the support of the community. So can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, and I have to speak first to enjoying the arts but not being an artist. I talk to music educators about the percentage of our students who will actually decide to professionally pursue music is very, very low. So our goals can't just be centered on whether you're going to be an artist or not. Like it's just part of being a whole human, and arts being an expression of that, and being the audience and receiving that communication is really, really important, and just having like a robust human experience. So everyone understanding that, I think, is kind of the first thing in understanding why the arts are important beyond just each performer or someone being a performer. I did a presentation with Jessica Fuentes, who is executive director of Kinfolk House, and she pulled data about arts funding in Fort Worth compared to the other major cities in Texas, and the disparity was really, really big. The amount of funding that the city designates toward arts is probably just like one single major nonprofits like full budget. And what I'm realizing is the level of advocacy we need is people who are showing up at city council meetings and speaking out about the roles of city manager and mayor, so on and so on, and getting more informed about where the money comes from, where it needs to go, how we can build it up. And as you said, nonprofits carrying that load. I have such a fraught relationship with the nonprofit industrial complex. Nonprofits aren't meant to hold that load, and there's so much in the Fort Worth scene I realize relies on philanthropy from people that you have to have a pre-existing relationship with, and you have to be making something that is deemed acceptable to them. And if you aren't, you don't really get the resources. And I've seen that in real time with my nonprofit work. Speaking nationally, there was a study that came out a couple years back that showed that BIPOC-led nonprofits suffer like a 24% deficit in funding over white-led nonprofits. It's really important for people to understand we have been raised, internalized with so much like anti-blackness and racism and stuff swimming around us, and normalizing the idea of seeing white people in positions of power in order to legitimize institutions. So it's really important that people look at, when they see someone like me they're going to have to understand that, like, they might not know the bias is coming into play, right? But it's very real, and I see it in responses to my work, the assumption that I'm not the leader. I've had someone try to email the nonprofit over me, not realizing that I am the person they were emailing. Or, people trying to, teach us about our culture, teach us about how to do X, Y, and Z. And it's so deeply embedded to the point where no one has to be overtly bigoted, overtly racist, overtly anything for that to make a difference. And so, when someone wants to build a relationship, those relationships you have to build, but nobody actually tells you how to build. Someone goes to the website and they see me and they see nary a white person. That's going to impact, again, if they even feel like they're connected to anything, or if that is something that needs to be represented. So people need to, first of all, examine that in themselves, but really be comfortable with speaking up with our city leaders, our government leaders, the people who hold the purse strings and who,
Yeah, I attended a council work session the other day, and they were talking about the upcoming bond. And at the end of every slide that they were talking about transportation, public works, parks, all the major departments, there was this little note that a certain percentage of all those bond dollars goes to fund public art in Fort Worth. But it was very much like an afterthought, and it was titled Contractual Obligation.
Whew.
And I was
an obligation, not a joy.
I was like a little bit horrified. And I fought, for that to not be reduced the entire time that I served on council, because there is a really strong component of folks that believe that your local government should not be funding those kind of things, that it should be just the pipes in the ground and the picking up of trash and all those things. And we fight on a regular basis, those of us who see the importance of the arts, to try to not have that narrative sound so negative. Because and I haven't reached out to them yet to put that into writing yet, to say maybe we could phrase that a little bit differently.
When it's time to reach out, I'll write with you.
Yeah, there you go.
Because we did see a little bit of reduction. They capped out some funding for program support lower than they had before.
How can people fill that gap? This is, a call to action. And for me, I feel like that there's a need to let people know how they can help.
Yeah. Honestly, like donate, share with your networks. Grassroots funding is really powerful. What was the state? They had that maybe. They had the Republican meeting and they carried the lady out because she was protesting.
That's a tough one to Google. Let's see what happens. Run meeting, carried the lady out.
Was it Ohio? I'm trying to remember what state it was in.
Was it recent?
Yeah,
it was recent.
A Republican
a week ago, women dragged out a
legislator.
Republican town hall meeting 2 weeks ago. Idaho.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So they had that Republican town hall meeting in Idaho, and a woman dissented. They grabbed her, they restrained her, they pulled her out, and nobody really stopped them. And then
they were like a private security that nobody even knew who they were accountable to.
She was yelling for them to identify themselves, and they were not. And then I think they quickly raised like $800,000, something like that. And it's like, oh, okay. I saw someone post, oh, you do have money to galvanize about things that you feel are important. We did have, a call for Kamala raising millions of dollars. And I think people need to understand when they do that, where's the money going when we are funding people who have privilege and means and so on, right? There's such a bigger disconnect from that than there is from just, giving $10, $20 a month to your local nonprofit that is actively doing work. And I think we really have to say some hard truths. First of all, about like the foundations of nonprofits and philanthropy, and what they do and don't do, and why it's important to have discernment around where funding is going. There, I think, are, obviously, like the big one is like a nonprofit can't not have profit. But beyond that, like this idea that they are fully staffed and resourced with people who have these overbloated salaries, or someone's working for free because they have someone else in the household who's making a livable wage. Like, none of that applies to me at all. And people who do nonprofit work and run organizations and, are in service to communities deserve to make a livable wage. Funding cannot just be for the things that seem big and flashy. It can't just be, we're going to give you money so, you can perform on stage. Like, money needs to be to live, because we all deserve to live and live well. And
administering the nonprofit.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to pay for that.
Exactly. And it kind of speaks to a deeper issue in, like what we see as human rights and what we see as people deserving of. People deserve livable wages and shelter and like safe housing and education and healthcare. There's such deeper narratives that we're going to have to rewrite. And then another hard truth is, I say this when I present, like, people don't want to say Black. So we need to be able to say Black, and we need to be able to say anti-Blackness, and we need to stop deflecting to POC when we say Black, because POC experiences are different. Their narratives within the scope of the society are different. And so when I say, as a Black woman, my funding disparity is not going to be, it's going to be much deeper than an East Asian woman, for example. And it really has to do with like the way that white supremacy has functioned and split us, and what is seen as, who's seen as like competent and who's seen as expert and stuff like that. And that's just one example, but I say that a lot. Like, people need to say Black, and then people need to look and say, part of the reason that people are not seeing this as something worth funding or something connected to them or their communities or their lived experience is because of how they see Blackness, and not wanting to specifically name that they would more readily donate to fund support the work of other POC groups, for example, than just Black folks. So our work, again, broadly advocates and highlights racially minoritized people, but I cannot separate it from my lived experience as a Black femme person who shows up in no other way. When people look at me, there's no other guessing what I, could or couldn't be.
Yeah. What I find fascinating is like this, like, Black funding is a big issue in Fort Worth. Like, I mean, look at even Opal Lee can't get funded for her National Juneteenth Museum. Like the nations gave Fort Worth an alley-oop, and we still can't dunk the ball in the hole of like, wow, we could be a Black tourism destination.
Yeah.
And then I feel like what you're doing, like, if I'm scratching my head, like, how aren't the cowboy stockyard artists, funder people, not looking at you as like, she's like us adjacent and giving an authentic palette of maybe our media macro version of what we sell as tourism.
Yeah.
But you got Black people playing guitar and strings, country music, blues. This isn't a Smooth Vega concert, which I love Smooth Vega, my boy. But you're bringing something that is what Fort Worth beats its chest on like being where the West begins, or being. And it's like, so I find, how's that been with you in that relationship?
Yeah, it's just been a pretty stark disconnect. One thing I have noticed is if I can get people there, they get it. But people aren't always going to be there to get it. I think I'm very new to marketing, promotions, advertising, all of that. So part of it is learning that in general, but then specifically what works for Fort Worth. So I'm not going to get most Fort Worth people just by sticking to social media, for example. And I think you have to say the question again because my mind just went squirrel.
Just the challenge of getting alignment from the other kind of Stockyards Western culture funds, like
and I think I'm a little more optimistic about this year because of feedback I've been getting, but it will be stuff like getting the word out there that the connection exists. So as I said, Dom Fleming's our headliner is literally presenting on Black cowboy music and cultural traditions. He is talking specifically about the Fort Worth recording industry. He's talking about the ties into Western swing. And I think making that connection, but also, like that bigger issue of not seeing Black people as interlopers in the music is going to be absolutely key. So I almost hate saying it. I hate the squeaky wheel gets the grease because every wheel can't be squeaky. Like, it's very ableist to assume that everyone is able to have the time, the knowledge, the like physical capacity to do that. But, it really will take advocacy and things reaching the right ears. And I always think of that in my work because it's like, how can I not only reach the right ears, but get them to understand that there are people who don't have the privilege of doing what I do, that they are going to have to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think your message is so much broader than just bringing attention to what you're doing. And so that you're answering your own question when it comes to that. You're bringing attention to what you're doing, but also highlighting the struggle that you have had, and that will make it so that the struggle will be less for folks going forward.
And then the conversations we're having, like, we have to have them, at the site of the issue. So, like, I've been in, Arts Fort Worth funding trainings, and I have to say this first. I love Arts Fort Worth. They when I talk to them, they're really receptive. It's really cool to be in conversation with them. But sometimes I'm the only one going, this isn't equitable. And then they go, oh, I didn't think about that. And then they pivot, right? Yeah. But it's like, why am I the only person saying that? Why, as a low income, single parenting Black person, probably, the most at risk among people in this room, am I the one who is saying that? And, I'm kind of taking it for granted that people need to hear that and that they need to do something different. I've been really pleased that with Arts Fort Worth that actually happens. Yeah. They are able to consider and make shifts. They're restricted, to a certain limit as far as like the city government. But as far as what they can do, like, they really will do something different. I've had the same experience with Communities Foundation of Fort Worth going, this isn't equitable. We have a conversation, and then they, try to improve that. But I can't be the only one saying that. We can't just go, this is what we get and this is all that we get. And even, when I'm performing locally, just, musician out at gigs, it's like we have to let people know that, no, I'm not playing for 3 hours for $100. Like, we're just not going to do that.
Yeah, I remember when when the ticket price came up one time in the early days, and people were like saying, I got there and it was more than I expected it to be. And then it was very clearly laid out what you were receiving for that. Yeah. And if you were to buy
Grammy
a ticket,
Award winners, NTA Heritage Masters, MacArthur Genius Grant Award winners, Steve Martin Banjo Award. Like, a single concert for one of them would be that price. Yeah. And something I've noticed about Fort Worth, I joke, Fort Worth kind of wants to eat and have music in the background. That is not everybody in Fort Worth, but as a gigging musician, I've noticed that kind of, tends to be the thing. And so there are, other venues and folks making moves to really set up like you are coming for the music. The music isn't an aside to the thing you're coming for. Yeah. So, like we have Lost in Sound.
Yeah, last night we only went and saw one performance last night, but to your point, there were conversations happening in the back. I went and saw Elizabeth Wills play at 440 Gallery, and that crossed my mind exactly what you just said, that whole just music playing in the background instead of being there to enjoy the performance.
But we have, Lost and Sounds is trying to advocate. I know This Your Side is doing their work. Like we have a Tulips now. We have these venues. Unfortunately, some of them have had to shutter because of lack of engagement, and then just since the pandemic started, so much stuff happening. But
a lot of people staying home instead of going out.
Yeah, and we just got to train people like.
Well, yeah,
art is worth
if you want nice things.
Well,
yeah.
And what I might say, it might not go into the pod, but it was more. I've been dealing with this a lot with like when I think about AI and the world we live in, and like, and I'm saying this.
I didn't even bring it up.
Okay,
my eyes went backward.
Yeah. No, but hold on to let me get through. It's things that are like if you type into ChatGPT, I want to create a music festival. Mm-hmm. What they're ultimately going to do is take information from colonized corporate versions of answers that the history. So then you're going to get like a mini Coachella or whatever they're going to recommend to you. And I think what makes what you're doing so special is that it's un-AIable. It's unprocessable. Like the only way that you can really understand it, it's if you're there, because the history of what you're trying to produce isn't even found in ChatGPT,
right? Because
they suppressed and exploited that history,
right?
And so what I'm saying here, and why every time your name comes up around me, is like I say ahead of your time, is because this thing that you're doing, I don't want to scare you, but 10 to 20 years from now, this is what people are going to be craved. Because in an AI world, when everything else is basic and numb, you got to go to things, and you're starting to pay for things that can't be processed by AI. Yeah. And you are building something that can't be processed.
Oh,
and I want you to know I see that.
Thank you.
So for everyone, you guys definitely have to go to the FWAAM Fest. Can you tell us a little bit more of who else can expect to be there? Who are they? And then kind of give kind of lineup.
So our headliner is Don Flemons, one of the founding members of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, Grammy Award winner, Emmy nominee, like just all these people like multi-hyphenates. And he will again be talking about Black cowboy musical and cultural traditions, in addition to just doing a performance set. Kishana, who is an amazing singer, songwriter, guitarist, music therapist. Yasmin Williams, amazing guitarist. She recently, her NPR Tiny Desk was recently released. And what's cool about her story is she submitted for the contest years ago and didn't win, but like her style's so innovative and so amazing that her career began to take off from there. So she's been doing amazing work, and I'm very excited to welcome her to the festival. There's so many artists where it's like maybe they haven't been to Texas, they haven't been to DFW, they haven't been to Fort Worth, and I'm starting to notice. I can't say I claim full credit, but part of my goal was to have artists in these styles route through Dallas-Fort Worth area, because they tend not to come through here. They skip over to Austin or maybe Houston. And I'm seeing more starting to come to other venues here. And FWAAM Fest does have a FWAAM Fest 25 Spotify playlist, so good starting point. It's gonna be amazing.
A whole lot to do on a lovely Saturday.
Yeah.
Well, Brandi, thank you for coming on to the 817 podcast, and thank you for being you here in Fort Worth, Texas.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to y'all.
That was awesome. So as we always do, we wrap up our pod each week with losses and wins. And we end on wins because we like to try to end on a high note. And I told EJ I was struggling to find losses because I felt like there was a whole lot of losses, with the exception of the Urban Rail conversation and our guest in our stories this week. But I did come up with one, and it is tied to two of the things that we've already talked about. One is the fact that on March 11th, you can go down to the state legislature and speak your mind on opinions about vouchers. But let me just tell you, they make it really complicated. Like, you cannot just walk in there. You're going to have to sign up to speak. You're going to have to be on their list. And you have to sign up like in the building, I believe. So there are steps to take, and it's a process. And I think Raise Your Hand Texas probably has some information that spells that out so that you can do that correctly. But my loss is that it's just really complicated to speak out and get in touch with our legislators on these topics. And sometimes these committees meet, and the scheduling of the meeting in which you get to go do that is a short time frame, and you have to go in person. Like, you have to show up in Austin, which means you have to be able to get there, and you have to maybe stay in a hotel, which, let me tell you right now, finding a hotel room in Austin is a challenging thing to do because they're expensive, because the legislature's in session and everybody is down there. And South by Southwest is going on right now. So it is wild in Austin right now. The second part is that some of these lawmakers are basically just not having town halls at home because they're facing pushback. And they are basically saying, we're not going to have a town hall because when we do show up for a town hall, angry people are there to tell us that we're doing a terrible job. And so their solution to that is just not have town halls. Yeah. That's nonsense. Yeah. So those are my losses. Well, I did send emails and make phone calls. So,
yeah, you can do a written testimony.
You can send emails to your legislators and put that in writing. And I basically got either automatic responses back from them or responses back that specifically spoke to the topic.
My loss is that there was we have lost 2 lives. One is a local rapper named GS Lil Ronnie and his daughter, who both were killed at a Forest Hill car wash. And really, this is just a loss in the sense of like, GS Lil Ronnie is a true local Fort Worth rapper who's a legit icon. Like, I mean, he's someone that there's this lack of appreciation of Fort Worth hip hop. And I understand there's a lot of ugliness within maybe the Fort Worth hip hop culture. But when you talk about art, when you talk about people who make music that people follow across the world, Lil Ronnie was one of those. And I just think, you're not, this is just an issue of like stories that need to be shared in full. And it's unfortunate that, we don't share GS Lil Ronnie's music or who he was before this incident. I'm not saying he was a saint. I'm not saying that any of that, but there was actual magic in his music when he was at the top of his game. And he's a part of a group, a community of people in Fort Worth. And I think Fort Worth is one of the underrated hip hop scenes. And he was a part of that. And so, and also just his daughter not being able to live her fullest life. And then you're talking about 2 young people who went to who murdered these 2 people. All of this is sad, just because this is Fort Worth through and through, and this is Fort Worth talent. This is Fort Worth people, and it just hurts that these are the things that makes us get in the news when there was such a great legacy of GS Lil Ronnie before this.
So my win is kind of looking at what we've been doing with the 817 Gather. And the response that we've gotten back of appreciation from folks that really have been kind of looking for ways to gather in community. And I think that's been really fantastic. But what opened my eyes in the last couple of days was looking at some other organizations that are giving these opportunities as well. And I think that the more gathering that we do as a community and the more community building we do in a diverse locations, diverse groups of people, crossing over between those groups of people, the better we will all be. And so I feel like our 817 Gathers are a great big win, but I also wanted to give a shout out to some other organizations and groups that are gathering and building community and working through some of the struggles and the hard things that all of this kind of community building requires. And that is, there's the historic Northside District and the Poly District. There's Northside Community, which is having a brunch coming up at their community garden. And I was on Facebook late at night the other night and didn't see it live, but saw it after the fact, a conversation that some of the leaders of Community Frontline had that touched on your loss that you were just describing, and how that has been so impactful on the community. And Community Frontline is having a gathering Monday night, which you will have the opportunity, if you get up early on Monday and hear this podcast, to avail yourself of. And my understanding is it's not going to have any agenda. It's just an opportunity to gather in community. But they have regular opportunities to gather in community to talk on various topics and have agenda-sized items as well. But I just am grateful for the people who are doing the work to have these community building spaces available. And I go to these events and these different gatherings and see, different groups of people, but crossover groups of people at various ones. And when I run into the same people over and over again, it reaffirms that I'm hanging out in the right places with the right people and broadening my perspective and my ability to make our city better.
My win is going to be the Fort Worth African American Roots Music Festival. I can't express how awesome this event is. Again, I was not tied to Brandi beforehand. I was someone who just showed up to this event and truly was jaw-dropped. The cultural experience, the authenticity, the uniqueness that this event is something that would give you hope and realize Fort Worth is a cool city and a city that can do cool stuff. And so check out the Fort Worth Fan Fest. If you're part of the 817 Gather Discord community, me and Ann will probably do something pretty cool where we try to get you guys to come together at the Fort Worth Fan Fest as well. So we're going to have more details there. But my win is just people like Brandi making Fort Worth better. All right, beautiful people, there you have it. Another episode of the 817 podcast. Make sure you subscribe, share with a friend, and continue to realize the more capacity we build together as progressive, modern, future-forward, conscious Fort Worthians, the more we come together, the more capacity we have to move the needle. And so don't forget that your voice, your actions matter, and you can change the city. Thank you so much for listening to the 817 podcast.
Swipe, dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your life. Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe.